A very quick note before we jump into our discussion. We had some connectivity issues which caused some audio errors towards the beginning of the episode. They aren't terrible, and they're mostly concentrated around 5 or 10 minutes into our discussion. They do clear up after a few minutes, so I hope you stick with us because I found that this was a really fruitful and enjoyable interview. We're going to get to hear some stories about Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Clive Barker, and get a lot of great advice about how to square being a creator and also trying to make a living and get a paycheck from your art. It's really just a lovely chat. So without any more delay, let's get into the show.
You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
All right. Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This week we are opening the crypt to chat about Carpe Noctem Magazine, and lucky us, we have the creator of said magazine, Thom Carnell, with us. Thom is well known for his interviews with all manner of horror icons, writers, authors, comic artists, and a lot more. He was head writer and creative consultant for Carpe Noctem Magazine, and I'm sure he did a lot more work than just that. He's also worked for Fangoria Magazine, DreadCentral.com, Twitch Film, and others. And he's also an author of his own fiction and horror novels, such as the collection No Flesh Shall Be Spared, Bloody Carnival, and a lot more that we'll get into. So as always, I'm the Count, and I'm here with my co-host Trey. Hello, Trey.
Hello, Count.
And Thom, thank you so much for taking some time out to chat with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So before we get into chatting about Carpe Noctem off the top, I always ask our guest this intro question of sort of how were you introduced to goth? But in your case, I'm curious to hear how you found a passion for horror. Was it something you grew up with? Was it an awakening? How did that happen?
Growing up, my mom was a big movie person, and she didn't shy away from it was just another new film. It may have been an action film, may have been a religious film, may have been a horror film. So I started watching film at an early time in my life, and became obsessed with it. We would sit in. It's normal for me to watch 2-3 movies a day. I was always drawn to the trappings of horror, and they just seemed to be more interesting stories than what else I was being given to read at the time and being given to watch. When I was 15, in separate incidents, 7 members of my family, my grandparents all died. 3 of my grandparents died that year, and some friends of the family, and a lot of really heavy stuff. And at that point, having gone through all of the funerals and that kind of a thing, it made an impact on me that later would come to fruition when, after Kat and I got married, I went to mortuary school and did time in funeral homes and that kind of thing. That kind of added to the atmosphere of it all. If you're with me,
that's man, we could do a podcast just on that. If I can interrupt and just ask how that what that experience was like to do that kind of a job, as far as, did it dehumanize people? Did you have to put yourself in a different space of mind to do that? Or
it was something that I felt that I needed to do, because it was something I knew that I could do. After meeting these people, when I lost all those folks, that they were able to sort of forge order out of chaos, if you're with me on that. And
Right. Yeah. Okay.
and that was
Yeah.
appealing to me as a young man growing up and wanting to serve and to help and to I grew up collaterally with all of this, with a lot of martial arts stuff going on, and so there was a lot of things put in me about, like, you give back and you do this and you volunteer and all of this kind of stuff. I had a family to take care of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
experience was profound. I mean, there's moments that you weren't really sure were real just because they were so heavy, you know.
Right. Yeah.
A woman at the end of a service, when I said, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" and she just goes, "What?" She said to me, "What do I do now?" I'm like, "Well, you go home." And I could back those kind of moments where they're ripping your heart out, and you're just honored to sort of be in the room. And then there are the other moments when you're doing midnight removals and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a job like any other. Yeah, it was something that was happening. I was doing all of that around the time that Carpe Noctem happened, which would be like 94, give or take. Excuse me. I had worked in some funeral homes. I had left to do work in the semiconductor manufacturing industry. Had been taken on a whim into San Francisco by a friend to House of Usher, where they were doing a zine slam. Amelia G from Blue Blood magazine, Outburn. There was those kind of magazines that were just in their infancy, kind of a thing. And went up there, started talking to them, and just asking them, like, "So, why would you do this? And tell me about zines and this kind of a thing." And on the way home, I just kept thinking that we could do this. We could do one of those. We could totally do one of those. I had a background I was a buyer for Tower for a long, long time. I was a rabid film person. I had media covered. And I went home and talked to Kat. Kat got what I called that Cecil B. DeMille look in her eye, you know, where she gets this look like, yeah, we could do that in spades.
So where did you go from there then? Because there was, there's a lot going on there. You go from an idea to actually, what were the ideas? What did you want to cover? How did you get into the actual business of it?
Kat sat down. We all kind of sat down and we're like, okay, we're going to do a zine, right? And Kat's background was in I think she had a high school yearbook class in high school, and I was just a smart ass on the early days of the internet, back in Prodigy days and AOL days and that kind of thing. I figured, well, you have a couple of interviews, you have some art pieces because I like art, and that sort of just all snowballed into thing that became regular occurring pieces, like here's the interview, or the book review section, the record review section, and we had to gather people along the way, people like Aaron Johnson. And Aaron had this goofy friend who drew pictures, and then he brought him over, and his name's Jonan, and we were like, oh yeah, these are hilarious, and we decided to start running those. And then it was I wish I'd say that there was a plan. But it was really a lot of things in our lives. It was this sort of like, let's just jump and we'll build ours on the way down. I started writing under like 7, 8 pseudonyms that were all little jokes, like the video game reviews I wrote under the name Ben Richards, which is Schwarzenegger's name in Running Man. That kind of thing, you know. And we tried things like, I tried 3 in our first issue and was quickly told by everyone to never do that again. So I didn't. But it let us just it was just about anything, you know, like I had this hit list of like, who would you want to talk to? And we just started going down the list. And how do you get in touch with that guy? How do you get in touch with that guy?
Right. So was this the first sort of published writing you had done, or had you been writing for other?
I had been writing on the internet, a lot of just nonsense, and then I was involved in a writers group that was called, of all things, House Carfax, and I wrote my first piece, something about an anti-claus that came around and snatched up bad children on Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sold the story to Swank magazine because Stephen King said if you have fiction, you should try to sell it to men's magazines because they pay well. So I sent them a story called Loose Ends about a guy who has sex with his TV set. They paid me $500.
Oh,
and,
wow.
I was ecstatic. Yeah, I was ecstatic. And it was that kind of chutzpah that I was just like, yeah, sure, we could do a media magazine. We could do that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, were either of you connected to subculture, any kind of subculture outside of horror, or because Carpe Noctem had a fairly cogent sort of theme and feeling to it? Was that just the stuff you were into, or were you drawing that from like a zeitgeist? Or
it was we were always, I guess, into the aesthetic, but like I'm a big guy, and I've never done the goth sort of attire well. There was a time we went to see Faith in the Muse, and I was so busy writing and pulling everything together, I forgot what I was wearing, and I showed up at the concert in denim overalls, and that was a problem. That was kind of a problem. But so it was just one of those things where there were certain corner posts that we wanted to hit. We wanted to be informative. We wanted to be whatever it was to be beautiful. We wanted to be positive. I think we only ever run one bad review, but it was one of those things where we just set up this sort of yard for us to work in, and then it's just it could be burial rites. It could be some kind of new music. I listened to a shit ton of music and all of that kind of stuff. It could be something I read. Could be someone I heard about, someone that interests me, and then I just, these days I pull back reaching out to contact them to do the interview, right? Because now I don't do any of that stuff anymore. I'm kind of just focused on the books and that kind of stuff.
Once you started, well, actually, I don't know what the sort of distribution was like, or if it grew, or if you started to hire new people, or how did that work?
As the first issue was coming together, we printed off on our laser printer. We printed off several pages and sent them by USPS to the mag buyer at Tower, who I kind of knew because I'm a buyer at Tower as well in store, but the mag buyer was sort of centralized. But I knew a guy who you know what I mean, and got him to at least open the envelope, and then they said, "Great, we love it. We'll take 1,000," and we were like, "Awesome!" That got us enough guaranteed to go into production, and then that was 7 years later, maybe 6-7 years later. It was just a flurry. We were talking to a guy named Todd Barber who worked on those magazines you pick up at the supermarket of homes, and you look and you're buying your homes.
Yeah.
Right. They're like free to give away. Yeah. Anyway, he worked on one of those for a company, and that's how he made his money. But he knew enough about Core Express and all that stuff, about the mechanics of how you put a magazine together. And Cat sat for hours, and Cat just looked over his shoulder. And then for the first few issues, he did it. And then we kind of took it over. And at that point, we were gathering people like Aaron Johnson, and we were Brian Reisman, who were reviewers. My friend Andrew Corson was a big Roz Williamson, so I go to Roz. I use my shield and go talk to your hero. And did, and came back great interview. It's just the momentum kept going and going and going and going.
So where did the magazine sort of end up as far as finding its audience? Because for me, and I was a teenager at the time, and it was important to me because I was able to pick it up at the mall. I think I was getting it at Hot Topic. I don't remember exactly, but I was sort of isolated from this thing that I was interested in. So being able to get a copy of the magazine and then read it and reread it and reread it and reread it and, discover authors and music and that kind of thing was like really important to me. But I had no sense of the sort of broader community that was into that kind of thing. So where did you guys, what kind of feedback were you getting? What was it? A horror fans, goth fans? Like, where was that coming from?
We were pretty happy with the fact that our readership and the letters we were getting were from people who fit the model, who when as soon as you got the envelope, you knew, yeah, this person is goth, because it would smell of lavender, and you would open it up and it was just so everything was just so beautiful, and then we get these hastily scrawled letters with, at one point someone sent us a dead animal in the mail, and not in a bad way. They thought it was like a really good thing that they were sending it to us. But Hot Topic was so important for us because Hot Topic moved, not only put the magazine where people could get it, but also they bought a lot of shirts from us, to be honest. And I have nothing but kind things to say about Hot Topic, even though it's easy to poke pins at them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people who were in the know at the time made fun of it, but for me, it was a Satan send. I don't know. It was really important.
I still go in whenever I'm in the mall. Yeah. I still wander in.
Yeah, they've got some good stuff in there.
Yeah, they're fine. I mean, for what they are, they were fine. They were so they were super important. And then we got into places like IPD, and IPD was a international periodical distribution company that would get us in places like Hastings and Barnes and Noble and that kind of thing. And that was really big for us. And we kind of knew what we were doing, but we kind of didn't. And we didn't understand why, like, there was a point where we handed the magazine. We had everything lined up handed it to the SideQuest cartridge. We handed the SideQuest to the printer and got a phone call an hour later telling us that they wouldn't print it because they were Christian and this is...
Oh, no.
And we're like, we have a deal. Yeah. So it was that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of it where things were happening, and we had this momentum, but it was still. By then we'd moved to Idaho, which is a super goth thing to do, admittedly. But we moved to Idaho because it kept our overhead down, and it allowed us to continue to publish, because publishing is not. You don't go into publishing because you want to make a lot of money, because no one was making any money. We were paying people to write for us, and I was writing under all these pseudonyms because we were just generating content, and and then it became a thing where publicists started calling us and saying, "Hey, do you want to talk to this person?" And it's like, "Yeah, yes, I do," and that really is where a lot of my, I go to a college and get my degree in English or whatever that allows me to write. What I did was I sat at the knee of people and asked them about the intricacies of narrative and how to get a story across. You with me? So like when Neil Gaiman says, "Let me tell you about writing," and talks for 3 hours, it's like, yeah, yeah, okay. And that's not anything you're going to get in an English course in a college, right? It's the inside poop. It's the big, it's the it's the opportunity to breathe that rarefied
Right,
air.
right.
And by doing that, you get a hint of not so much the A, B, C's and D's of it, but the attitude and the swagger of it all. You with me?
So I mean, was there any tension between wanting to learn more about writing and to interface with these like huge people in that scene, and then the other side of trying to, because I assume you're working your day job and going from fly by the seat of your pants to this is kind of a business thing. Did that become an issue?
It became clear that we were we had all this passion, about, like, every single interview was I had mentioned to you on a previous conversation about, I'm a big note taker, and I go into interviews with all of this information, and it was a way that uh, I could share this really cool thing, because most of the interviews I did are verbatim. They're literally a
Oh wow.
conversation. There was some
Yeah.
editing involved, but a lot of those interviews that are in the Carpe Noctem interview books that you can pick up on Amazon, um,
Links in the
uh,
description.
is is just it's just a conversation. It's like, again, when I had an opportunity, when we were going down the list of people that we wanted to talk to, when it was like, a big one for me was Bob Wilkins, because Bob was a important person for me in the idea that he was a horror host for Creature Features in San Francisco when I was growing up. Huge
Mm,
impact for me. And so, do you want to talk to him? Yeah, well, yeah, because I want to at least pay homage, and that kind of
yeah.
enthusiasm, I think, is infectious when the people read it. And that's another thing that I think carried through the magazine as a thread, was this sort of infectious enthusiasm for everything. We dearly loved every person we covered, um, and and uh, and we met a lot of really wacky people. Uh, but they were amazing, because they had that same love and same understanding of the 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 things that most other people shy away from, right? The attitudes
Mm,
and the areas of research and investigation. So, but there was no, there was never a point where we knew it was a business, but it was more of, the business part of it was stuff that had to happen so that we had this platform on which to show people things. Carpe Noctem in a lot of ways was just show and tell. It was like, look
right.
at this cool book I found, and look at this cool person I met, and look at this
Mm.
cool artist who sent me these pictures, and aren't these amazing? Um, so
I do really, I really do think that did come across in reading through the magazines, and in general, I think the best content, or at least the content I prefer, is when the person making it is really passionate about just this, they're a fan,
mhm,
and they're a fan with you, and they're being a fan with you, and I think that's really special.
mhm.
Um, but since you did bring up interviews, I mean, you've probably got a story or two in you about some of the most, I guess, insightful or eye-opening or important interviews were for you.
When I was working for Fango, they did a Clive Barker illustrator book, and
Okay.
they sent me a phone call, and I called Rob, who's Clive's assistant, and we set it up, and I drove my motorcycle from San Diego up to LA, into the
Hmm.
hills above Beverly Hills. Um, Took me into a house that had probably 6 rooms in it, not counting whatever was upstairs, which was a house of 4 that he owned. Um, One was the living quarters. I think one was the studio. One is the work office, and I forget what the other one was. But the home I was in, along the wall were paintings that were a good 4 feet high, side by side. And they covered every inch of every wall in the house, right? And so you're looking at it, it's just Barker paintings as far as you can see. And I asked, could I look at these? And he's like, yeah, sure. Walk over, and as I touch them and I leaf through them, there's dozens of them in every pile of painting, and they're all beautiful. They're just, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, unbelievable stuff. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah.
For incredible. For Carpe Noctem, going on Gore's bus was hilarious. Interviewing, we interviewed Slemenstra at a bar, and Odorous, rest in peace, Dave Brocky, on the bus, and I thought it was going to be really hard, like wild. It turned out they were watching Legend of Riccio on the TV and playing Magic.
Nice.
And playing Magic the Gathering. And I thought,
that's amazing.
We were at the Trocadero in San Francisco. It was the Fabulous Poodles opening for a band called SMG, which stood for Screaming Mad George. George is a Japanese effects guy who did things like Bride of Reanimator, and he's super, super inspired by Dolly. But he also fronts this rock band. So we went up there and we ended up interviewing him in an alley. Him and a bunch of his friends from Japan, and I don't think any of them spoke English. And so as we were talking, the side door burst open, and these bouncers came out and were beating the shit out of this guy. Oh. And I just remember everyone panicking. And I'm like kind of turning them away from the Fuhrer back there, trying to keep asking my questions and shoving my little recorder in their mouth or in their face. Jeez. For Carpe Noctem, being involved with a lot of the From Dusk Till Dawn stuff. We covered Robert Rodriguez in one of the magazines. That was very cool because that helped forge the way to my relationship with Tony Timpone, who was then the then editor of Fangoria. So when Carpe Noctem sort of went out, I just sort of dovetailed over because of my relationship with Tony, having interviewed him a couple of times for the magazine, and he gave me a shot. And then I worked for Fango for about 10 years.
So, okay. Johnny the Homicidal Maniac.
Sure.
That comic became hugely popular in goth circles. That was everywhere. And it inspired like other goth artists to create their own sort of dark comics and stories in that way. So, how did you get in contact with Vasquez? What was it like watching that whole thing develop?
Again, we met this guy, Aaron Johnson, who knew Jonan, and Aaron's a big music guy. He had been writing for a bunch the local music magazine, City Revolt, and he got me to work for them, that kind of a thing. So he was hanging out and writing reviews for us and whatever. And he goes, "Yeah, I got this guy," and he draws these pictures, and they're really kind of cool, and they're really, really different. And Jonan came to the house, and we immediately were like, "Yeah, perfect, we'll take it." And at that point, we lived in the same town as Dan Vado, who ran Slave Labor. So we knew Dan, and Kat was like, "I'll just come with me and I'll take you to Dan." And so she took him to Dan. And the next thing you know, Dan signed him up. And because Dan was much better suited to do that, to give him the break he needed, right? He needed a comic guy. He didn't need a mag guy or a music guy or a film guy. He needed a comic guy. And the book took off, and justifiably so, And then by the time Zim happened, everything was set. And now I hear Netflix picked up the Zim movie that's coming out next year. But at the time, we used to talk about how a lot about audience and about perception, about how we wanted to be perceived. Both he wanted the comic and how special the comic was to him, and how he wanted it perceived, and how I remember when Zim was happening, how he was like, I want to create something different because Johnny is super special.
I think it was a couple years ago at the big Halloween, goth Halloween party here. Someone did entered the costume contest as Johnny, which was pretty cool to see that's still made such a lasting impact that's people are still really into it.
Nice.
So I guess I did want to ask you, I mean, you talked about, some of the process you went through starting the magazine. Weirdly enough, and actually just yesterday, 2 days ago, somebody messaged me on Facebook about starting a local zine and was asking for my input and some stuff like that. But I've been seeing people talking more and more recently about doing those types of, physical content creation, whether it's locally or broader than that. So I figured you would be a good person to ask about, where might someone start? What are some of, what are some tips that people can use to avoid making mistakes?
I don't know. At the time, the time that we were doing what we were doing, zines were like a thing, like there was a magazine dedicated to reviewing zines. If you ever,
I didn't know that.
Issues of, it's called Fact Sheet 5. And it lists all these crazy little tiny zines. Paul Mack in Tacoma, he does this House of Dormouth horror review zine that he literally Xeroxes, staples together himself and sends it to people. And it's great. And he does it purely because he loves to. And that's when it's fun. But when it's like, when you're shouting like J. Jonah Jameson at people about artwork and all that, financial stability lies on you pulling stuff out of the air. You know what I mean? It could be a little different these days. What with like Tumblr and blogs and Pinterest and all this other stuff, there's such a wealth of things out there.
Well, I mean, how do you feel about that now? Like, it seems like you can't, other than a few stalwarts in, their respective communities, you can't really make a business out of physical magazines and that kind of stuff.
Well,
go ahead.
The debilitating part for us is that so the way the model worked was, I'm going to print 5,000 magazines, and on paper I have orders for all 5,000 of them, and I send them out to all the respective stores and whatever else. At the time, they were doing this thing where it's not cost effective for them to send the magazine back to you, and if they did, it would be all beat up.
Right.
So they just tear the cover off or tear the masthead off and send that to you, and then you'd credit them on their account. But your magazine is still in the trash, right, without a cover, and that just kills you in that model. There's just all you need is one issue with a bad cover, or with maybe you didn't get the chemistry right on drawing, the drawing people in with who you were interviewing or whatever else, and it'd be debilitating. I'm all, as far as Pinterest and that, Instagram and all that other stuff, I'm for anything that puts something beautiful in front of my eyes. I'm down with. Unfortunately, you have to wade through that other stuff to get to it. But I mean, I just remember always just telling Kat, like, all I ever wanted to do was to make something beautiful. And to this day, I still, in my other work, I still consider it that way too. I do a lot of horror stuff, but there's a lot of, I like to think, of beauty and all of that other stuff involved in that too. So,
do you feel like some of that quality is lost now that everything is decentralized and everything is digital?
Well, I mean, I think that it's everything, the shelf life is much quicker. that's one of the reasons I got, when I'm going to use air quotes on, call it journalism, is the idea that I would do an interview with someone and take 2 weeks, set it up, take a day to do it, take 3 or 4 days to transcribe it, another 2 or 3 days to write up. It goes up on, when I was working for Dread Central, and this is not Dread Central problem, but goes up on Dread Central and it literally has a 12-hour relevancy.
Wow.
And then it's gone forever into their archive, which is fine. But on the other hand, it's like, I want a little more than that,
Yeah.
And you liquored me up and you got bothered, and now it's like, that was it. So it just became less and less. And plus with the internet, you've got like everyone's an authority is another thing. It's a real problem. Is just say everyone, and the thing that drove me away from horror journalism is everyone's an authority on the same 6 or 8 movies. You're all going to have, it's Halloween, it's Freddy, it's this, that, but no one wants to dig deep and find the Singaporean horror film where the villain is haunted apples. You know what I mean? So why I have that conversation 1,000 times again and again and again.
Yeah, I guess there's.
I'm trying not to be the old on a porch.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a discoverability problem too, because there's got to be people out there that are still into that kind of thing, but because everything is so flooded with good stuff and just a ton of shit that it's hard to actually find people that are taking the time.
My friend Brian Ellison always quotes Theodore Sturgeon. He calls it Sturgeon's law that says 99.9% of everything in the universe is shit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I used to say all the time, like, being a genre fan in any genre, anything that you love, you're always going to be faced with the prospect of you're panning for gold in a river of excrement, and you're trying to wade through all of it. And now these days, I no longer look for the perfect film or the perfect record or whatever. I just want that moment that makes me want to cry, you know what I mean? Or makes me want to, that touches me in a place that kind of hurts, but it feels good too. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Right.
But as far as it all being available, it just puts the onus on the person to go find it. No one's going to hand deliver it. It's on you. You got to go find that stuff. Find the things that inspire you.
Yeah. Well, even there are curators out there, but it seems like they're both hard to find and don't stick around very long because they don't get any. There's no appreciation and no one cares. Doing this podcast it's not huge. And I do a shit ton of work every week, all the time. I do it because I love it, but it's, you're never going to reach, unless you're on an existing platform. I think, like, if you were, well, I guess you mentioned Fangoria only has a 12-hour limit, so that actually kind of bums me out. Maybe that's not the solution, but.
Yeah, I think that what I've reconciled myself to is that, So if the model doesn't support me financially, then it has to support me emotionally or whatever. It somehow feeds my soul and makes me a better person. So for me now, I tried over the last year or so, I've really been working on this whole like killing the ego thing. So now for me, the joy is in the process. When I write something and I finish it and I send it away to Crossword Press, I'll see it again in a month or two when it comes back from editing and, for final layout, whatever. But for the most part, once I go, that's done, it's gone. And I've had people come up and go, remember when that happened in that story you did? And no. Because it just comes out and it's just this sort of.
Yeah, I guess it is more about depth than reaching a wide audience. As long as I know that the thing I did made a difference for one person and touched them in some way and was part of their life in some meaningful way, that really does mean a lot. So I
absolutely. what you just said in the intro about how important the magazine was, that really is like important to me. It's like, wow, man, because we got so little of that. We've always worked, and I continue to work in a vacuum. So when you hear those moments about like, wow, this little shout in the room I made, someone heard it, and that's awesome. That's that connection that all artists sort of want, and that's enough. But I think we've been fooled into thinking that, you know, it's no, but it's got to be fame and glory and you know, whatever. When it's just there's a nobility about just shutting your mouth and doing your art and letting your art talk for itself. You know.
Yeah. That is the narrative that is really easy to get sucked into, is if I don't have a million views on whatever it is, it's not good enough. And you kind of miss those connections. Like, this one person really did, like, it did change their life in some way. I think that's a problem more with culture in general. But
when we were doing the bonus material, we were pulling in, you know, looking at our numbers, and our numbers were good, but they weren't astronomical. But then we started to do a little research and found out, while on paper the number may be 2,000, but those 2,000 are who they are. They're effects guys, they're writers, they're what we were doing was providing content for creators to listen to. I started to get email from the likes of, you know, Paul Komoda and those kind of guys who were saying, like, I listen to the podcast while I'm sculpting, and it's like, you know, that's nice. That's nice. It's nice to contribute, you know. And now I feel, in many ways, with Carpe Noctem, I sort of forced my way into the room. And now it's like, you're going to drag me out of that room. Now it's because it's like, I have a voice now, I have a platform, and I can't just have to. I don't have to bother my wife at night telling her some wild idea I had. Yeah.
So then, Thom, you know, what is, you know, we talked a lot about Carpe Noctem. That was mostly because it was important to me as a youth. But you've written other stuff. You've got your short story of collection. You've got some other horror books out there. You know, tell us about, like, what kind of stuff you're writing, what it's about, where we can get it, that kind of thing.
Books are available on Amazon. They're for Kindle and they're for print, and you can get them at Crossroad Press. So after I left Carpe Noctem around 2005, I decided, I had a funny little idea, because my son was going to college for video game design, and I thought, well, I wonder if I could make a game. So I came up with this game, and I looked at the market and thought, what's my target audience? This sounds so decidedly unartistic, but it's my target audience. Males 18 to 20, because they have a lot of disposable income, and they, you know what I mean? That was like, yeah, that seems like I could part with a few dollars. And so what was happening at the time with them, the two things in the zeitgeist were zombies and the UFC. And so I put those together for a book called No Flesh Shall Be Spared that came out in 2010. It's 160,000 words. It's zombie pit fighting and a various corporation. It's very action. It's muscly. That book is super muscly, because I felt it had to be. It's a lot of, let me put it this way. There is a version on my computer of the book called the unfuckified version, which I pulled out. I went through it and pulled out the F word 678 times. And there's still lots of them in it. Because I knew a lot of fighters, and I trained martial arts, and I just wrote how these guys talked, and these guys. So it's that kind of a thing. It came out, did well, people liked it. Right around that time my mom died, I went into a radical writer's block where I couldn't write anything for a number of years. And then I started to work on the first short story collection called Moonlight Serenades. There's going to be 3 of them. They're all based on Glenn Miller songs, which were really important to my mom. But Moonlight Serenades is me working through the writer's block. There's some Carpe Noctem stuff in there that I sort of retooled. It was just me trying to get writing again. At that point, I released the second zombie book, which is a takes place on a tropical island, and there's lots of guns and zombies and a 10-year-old girl that's a martial arts expert.
Nice.
Yeah. She's pretty great. Released String of Pearls after that, which is another short story collection. That is me working, just having fun and kind of pulling ideas together and making constructs. There's a story in there called Family Man that I wrote purposely from a perspective of someone that I find abhorrent. The idea was try to put on the skin of someone who you hate, who you would absolutely hate, and try to make their position justified.
Ooh, wow. Yeah, that's rough.
So then, I know, and there's a lot of the stuff I work on is can get a little rough. The serenades, when I fall in love, people tell me they cry all the time to it. And so there's that. No Flesh Shall Be Spared 2 came out. Right now I'm working on Tuxedo Junction, which is a third short story collection. After that, I'll do No Flesh Shall Be Spared 3. And I think I want to do, I've been looking at a Monster Mash idea. If you look at films like Abbott and Costello and Lewis Scared Stiff, the idea that everyone they encounter, there's like, it's my mom who happens to be a gypsy woman and her son who happens to be a werewolf. And I just love that idea of like, the mad scientist on the hill and the plantation in the lowlands of the island that has the zombie workforce. You know what I mean? I just love that whole thing. Mm-hmm. So, and then from there, who knows?
Yeah. I do love that sillier stuff. Like I'm a big, I love gore and I love horror films and philosophical horror films and all that stuff. But there is something to that old school sort of silly, serious feel that's special. Yeah.
EC comic stuff. Yeah. I did a thing there's a story called Plexus that has to do with a man masturbating into a swamp, and later he's visited by his progeny of like this baby frog human thing.
Okay.
I'm glad laughing. Criteria for all of my stories are, does the concept make me laugh? There's a story in String of Pearls called Sword of St. Michael. It began under the title Jean-Claude Van Damme Exorcist.
Okay.
So
I love that. That's awesome.
If it makes me laugh, I did a big novella called Clown Town, and the premise is a world where social structure is dictated by what kind of clown you are. So Harlequins are 1%, and there's like the white faces, and the rodeo clowns are beneath them, and there's the ICP clowns. Takes place in a wine bar called Marceau's. That started because I was real high one night. I just thought of it, and I thought, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard or thought of. I told my wife, and my wife looked at me stone-faced, like, that's not funny at all. It turns into this thing that's actually very endearing. It's riddled with jazz, like old school, like Ike Quebec, old sultry, smoky jazz, and it's fun, right? Having fun, and then just getting a screw idea, and then put the screws to it until it. I have very specific philosophies on a lot of that stuff. Where if I'm going to give you a pill to take, there being zombies, then everything has to be legit and believable, so that it helps you believe that the dead can get up, right? Otherwise, I mean, the problem with a lot of things like Walking Dead is that it's this snowball effect where there's no narrative going on. There's a lot of little narrative that happen, but there's no philosophy and there's no cohesion there. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Like internal logic. Yeah. So as far as, I'll have links to all the stuff that's available on Amazon in the show notes. Is there a central website you want people to go to?
My website, ThomCarnell.com.
Cool.
That's got everything.
Cool. Thom, thanks for taking some time. It really was a pleasure to get to chat with you for a bit.
Thanks. It was fun.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.